On September 24, 2025, at the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan once again raised Kashmir before the world body. His address renewed controversies, diplomatic rebuttals, and renewed scrutiny over the role of third-party states in issues India considers internal. India responded strongly. The UN community, as usual, watched carefully. Some applauded, some stayed silent, some weighed interventions. During his address to the 80th UNGA, Erdoğan included the Kashmir dispute in his speech, urging that it be resolved through dialogue and anchored in UN resolutions. He said, and I quote, "The issue of Kashmir should be resolved on the basis of resolutions of the UN for the best of our sisters and brothers in Kashmir. Through dialogue, we hope. And we are pleased with the ceasefire achieved following the tension last April between Pakistan and India, which had escalated into a conflict." This way, Erdoğan expressed that Turkey views peace and stability in South Asia as important and thus encouraged cooperation between India and Pakistan on counter-terrorism. He tied his invocation of Kashmir to the recent flare-ups, particularly referencing the April hostilities and the ceasefire. Several observers interpret Erdoğan's remark as part of a larger geopolitical posture. 1. Alignment with Pakistan. By echoing language reminiscent of Pakistan's approach to press for UN involvement, criticize India, invoke Kashmir as human rights issues, Erdoğan seems to reaffirm Turkey's closeness to Islamabad. Second, international profile and soft power. By raising Kashmir on the UN floor, Turkey bolsters its self-image as a champion of Muslim causes, human rights, and peripheral issues often overlooked in mainstream global diplomacy. Third, domestic considerations. Facing internal economic, political, or social challenges, leaders sometimes turn to foreign policy, especially issues with emotional resonance for domestic audiences, for example, Muslim identity, solidarity, etc. International media has noted this as singing the Pakistani tune while facing domestic turbulence. Fourth, signaling and positioning. By invoking UN resolutions, Erdoğan may be signaling to the third parties like OIC, Muslim states, or global opinion that Turkey sees Kashmir not just as a bilateral India-Pakistan matter but an international issue deserving multilateral oversight. Thus, while his remark may not change facts on the ground, they are strategically calculated. India's response. Once Erdoğan's remark became public, India launched a multi-pronged response: rhetorical, diplomatic within UN forum, and via spokespersons' statements. So what was the immediate public MEA reaction? India's Ministry of External Affairs strongly rejected Erdoğan's intervention. The key line of response included, and I quote, "Jammu and Kashmir is an integral part of India." This phrase is repeated in many statements, signifying non-negotiability of sovereignty and territorial integrity of India. And Kashmir, national territory, is not open to third-party comment. And this way, India declared Turkey's comment as unwarranted and interfering. And it said that Turkey had no locus standi, no legitimacy to comment on India's internal affairs. India highlighted terrorism and cross-border violence. And it said, if external states wish to comment, they ought to speak against Pakistan's use of cross-border terrorism. In other words, India asserted that any balanced remark should include recognition of India's security concerns. One spokesperson, Randhir Jaiswal, said, "Jammu and Kashmir is an integral part of India. No other country has any locus standi to comment on it. Instead of commenting on internal affairs of another country, it would have been appropriate if Pakistan's policy of using cross-border terrorism against India had been called out." Another MEA spokesperson emphasized that India rejects external mediation involving states taking sides. Whatever solutions are considered must respect India's sovereignty and constitutional framework. So India at the UN exercised its right to reply. Let's discuss what were the diplomatic channels. While public statements matter, India likely also utilized right to reply privileges in the UNGA. States often reply to remarks made about them in assembly or in UN forums. Though the specific transcript of India's UNGA reply is not fully in major news yet, one can infer probable themes based on India's consistent stance. So, India's first stance was to reassert sovereignty and territorial integrity, rejecting third-party comments as interference, emphasizing terrorism and national security and need to deal with cross-border violence, and possibly invoking UN principles, equality, non-interference, to counter Erdogan's invocation of UN resolution. India also pressed for balance. If one invokes human rights, then India may demand reciprocity. Other states should comment on all conflicts, including those involving Pakistan. Additionally, India would likely communicate via diplomatic notes to Turkey, ask for clarification or protests, and possibly request Turkey to refrain from further comments on India's internal issues. India's broader diplomatic outreach will be telling its narrative to other UN member states. Engaging ambassadors also forms part of the response beyond the public diplomacy. Now let's discuss what was United Nations and global reaction. So it was mixed and tactical silence. In many major news reports and articles, the spotlight is on Turkey and India. But what about other UN states or blocs? Some nations may quietly welcome Ankara raising Kashmir as it gives space to internationalize the issue, especially among Muslim majority or OIC states. Others likely stayed muted to avoid direct confrontation with India or Turkey. Within UN body, rarely a unified formal reaction to one country's remark unless they trigger a formal procedural challenge or motion of protest. No immediate counter-resolution or formal condemnation of Erdogan's remark has been widely reported in mainstream news. That suggests that while Erdogan's address stirred controversy, it did not provoke a direct formal pushback from other powerful United Nations actors, at least not in the immediate media cycle. In multilateral diplomacy, countries often expect that criticisms or comments directed at them are met with right to reply at the same forum or via diplomatic notes. India's response fits that norm. It's not only private protest but public rebuttal. However, if a state repeatedly raises another's internal disputes on international floors, the boundary between critique and interference becomes contested and norms of restraints are tested. Turkey's speech is a part of a battle of narratives. Who frames Kashmir as a right issue? Who controls framing in global media? Each public remark, UN floor invocation, or rebuttal contributes to shaping global public opinion, other states' mindsets, and diplomatic bargaining. India must fight not just in battlefield of diplomacy but in the arena of legitimacy, narrative control, and multilateral norms. Turkey may continue to bring up Kashmir in even UNGA, HRC, or multilateral gathering. India may respond increasingly harshly or retaliate in diplomatic domains, expel envoys, downgrading relations. Tensions may spill into bilateral relations, visa restrictions, trade barriers, cultural boycotts, travel advisories. Indeed, Indian travel associations have already boycotted Turkey tourism and earlier tensions. Turkey may try to rally OIC, Islamic states, or sympathetic UN members to pass motions, issue statements, or amplify pressure on India. And India will try to isolate this push by engaging other major powers. For example, US, EU, BRICS nations, African states, to push back against undue interference and defend sovereignty. Repeated UN floor motions may gradually institutionalize Kashmir within UN debates that would challenge India's preference for bilateralism. If Turkey or others succeeds in getting UN bodies to adopt resolution or create mechanism, per se investigate fact-finding missions on Kashmir, if global media amplifies negative portrayal of Kashmir, India's soft image and diplomatic capital may suffer. Domestically, India's leadership may face pressure to respond strongly to external comments, making moderation harder. India can use its diplomatic muscle, development initiatives, media diplomacy, and engagement with non-aligned neutral states to counterbalance Turkey's narrative. India can frame cross-border terrorism as central in any Kashmir discussion, making third-party commentary seem lopsided if it ignores that component. Pressure on India's reputation and soft power The UN stage is not fixed. It is a battlefield of legitimacy. How India and Turkey trade it may influence not just Kashmir's narrative, but the very norms governing intervention, sovereignty, and global discourse. Thank you for watching. I'm Shubham, and you're watching The News Point.